Good afternoon. Welcome to Tech Talk with Steve. And Gene and Kevin adopted her.
Hello, and thanks for joining today.
Lisa, she's in the know. Welcome, Lisa.
No.
We might have a couple of extra guests.
Introduce people to what the NSA is. I'd like to start with
You make sure you set your test up properly.
It's going to ask me the diameter of what I'm wrapping.
There's some significant difference here. So
with an F-150
is along that channel.
let's say a user can successfully reach a server.
Your notes are all in the closet, and you're walking around the office area with the main.
And what Test Pro is doing right now, and again, I'm using a single Test Pro into a network.
They went out to the customer site, which was very impressive.
Hello, welcome to episode 18 of Tech Talk with Steve. I'm your host, Steve Cowles with AEM Test. Today we're talking about innovations in cable testing, and specifically we're going to be talking about the differences between certification when you're using dual-ended test equipment like our award-winning Test Pro product, or Qualification Plus when you're using a single-ended test application like with our Network Service Assistant and this Advanced Identification Remote. And today we have a special guest with us who's going to join us and explain some of the differences and how the standards apply to both types of testing. I'd like to welcome to the show AEM's General Manager of Test and Measurement, Harshang Pandya. Welcome, Harshang.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, good morning.
Your
everyone.
microphone is muted. There you go.
Can
Appreciate
you
you joining us today, Harshang.
Steve, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I
Fantastic.
think there's a slight delay.
Okay. Yeah. Hello, everyone.
So Harshang, if you'd like, I've talked a little bit about this, and we've talked in previous episodes about Qualification Plus using our Certilite technology that you and the R&D team have developed, along with our certification testing in the Test Pro Multifunction Certifier. And I know you've got some in-depth details as far as how the standards apply to both of these, because a lot of people feel that the standards only classify dual-ended certification, but there's a lot more involved in the standards, and single-ended testing is a part of it. So would you like to go into some detail about that?
Absolutely, Steve. So why don't I share some slides and we can discuss from there.
Okay.
So when we talk about dual-ended testing, it is Test Pro certification test, and single-ended cable performance testing is Qualification Plus with our Network Service Assistant. And today I will walk you through some of the important similarities and differences between these two types of testing. And also I will try to describe where single-ended testing with Qualification Plus is useful, applicable, and also how it is done, so that it clarifies if there are any questions or any curiosity about the way the testing happens. It will be slightly technical, and I am sorry if it is going too much into technical details. I will try to make it as clear as possible, and let's see how it goes.
Okay.
So yeah. So talking about the standards, there are two standards that govern how the testers are developed and how they should perform the testing. These are TIA 1152A, primarily used, called the TIA standards, primarily used in North America and many other parts of the world, and IEC 61935-1, primarily used in Europe and also many other parts of the world. And these standards are very similar actually, and they define which test parameters are tested. So they have a set of test parameters specified. Each tester must test all those parameters. And they also specify, the standard also specifies not only what is tested, but also what is reported and how it is reported. So if you are familiar with our Test Data Pro reporting software, I think Steve has gone to details of those, and the PDF reporting, that all follows how standard specifies reporting to be done. Besides the parameters and their reporting, the standard also specifies the accuracy requirements of the test equipment. Now, this is important because uh, every tester is in the end a physical equipment which has its own capacity and limitations. Uh, for testing a specific category, let's say Cat 6A or Cat 8, there is a need for a certain level of guaranteed accuracy for measurements that can be relied on. And so the standard specifies those accuracy requirements for three configurations: channel, permanent link, and baseline. So baseline is where you have a tester without any adapter, just at the interface of the tester, the connector of the tester, right? So that is like absolutely the core accuracy of the tester itself, and then you have channel and permanent link interfaces. In addition to these, the standards also specify test configurations in terms of single-ended or dual-ended testing. So here we will talk more about the two types of testing. So on the left, you can see there is a tester that looks very similar to our test pro. It is a dual-ended certification test configuration. And on the right, what you have is single-ended test configuration, wherein you only have one test unit and the other end of the cable under test is attached to a passive terminator. So this is the qualification plus test. The main advantages of the qualification plus single-ended test is, first is it is cost effective, because instead of two full test equipment, main and remote, you only have one test equipment, so half the cost actually, with a low cost terminator at the remote end. This qualification plus tester actually measures all important RF and DC parameters. So we will have a little bit more detail on that in next slide. So it gives a very clear view of cable's compliance to specific category like Cat 6A or Class EA. And it gives, more importantly, an assessment of cable compliance to all current networking standards, multi-gig, including 10G base T standard. Having said that, I should also highlight that single-ended testing and qualification plus is not suitable as a certification test for vendor warranty claims in cable installations. If you are doing a certification test of new installation, by all means you should use the test pro and perform certification test. So where is qualification plus test with NSA useful? This test is very useful for example, moves, adds, and changes. When you have changes in the cabling plant in a building, it is a perfect way to validate that the cable are still performing the way they should. So you can check all the parameters with the qualification plus tester. The other area is when you go from 1 gig to, let's say, 5 gig, or 5 gig to 10 gig, 10 Gbps, right? Multi-gig Ethernet. We always have need to go from one network standard to higher network standard for speed increase. And this is where you also benefit from this tester to quickly validate the suitability of cabling to support the next higher network speed, right? Before you deploy your actual gear, we can be assured upfront that it is going to be all right. The third area is finding and locating cable fault. NSA, although it is only one tester, it is equally powerful in finding cable faults and locating them. So we in this tester, all the fault location plots, the RL fault locator and next fault locator are equally powerful, as with the certification tester. So you can pinpoint where the problems are. And in fact, NSA also measures shield discontinuity, both DC discontinuity where the shield is open, right? You have no connection to shield from one end to other for shielded cables, and also AC discontinuity where the shield might have DC connection. So with a multimeter, you can see that shield is all right, but in fact it is not. So we can detect such issues as well with qualification plus single-ended tester. In addition, this is also very useful in internal audit or documenting a cable plant performance. Uh, and it can also be used in other applications, as an example, spool testing in the manufacturing test environment, right? So there are so many different applications where NSA is in fact the best choice of tester, cost effective, yet providing all necessary details. Here is a list of different parameters. So as you can see, almost all parameters that are measured in certification test, dual-ended test, are also measured in single-ended testing. This is the last column here, right? However, there are certain differences. So when you, for example, look at pair-to-pair next, the dual-ended certifier measures next at both main and the remote end because we have two testers. Whereas qualification plus NSA measures only at the main unit. Okay, so what you need to do, if you have a need to measure from both ends, you can still do it, but you have to take the NSA unit to the remote end, to the other end, and connect the terminator at the main end, and then perform second test if you really need to assure next measurements from both ends. So it then will include two measurements. Same way for ACRF uh, and return loss. So for all these parameters, the measurement is done at one end, whereas in certification tester, the measurement of these parameters happen at both ends. If you, as I said, if you need to test at both ends, you still can do, but then it will need two tests with NSA. As I discussed, the fault locators are present with the same performance in both types of testing. Okay, so with that, let me share how is it done. Basically, how testing can be performed for all parameters with only one end. Uh, the remote terminator, which is a passive device, is in fact a very powerful device, and and this is what makes it possible for the NSA to do qualification plus tests. The remote device has several functions. First, it provides a specific electrical signature to the main unit to perform DC measurements like wire map or DC resistance measurement. Uh, it can act as an absorber of the signals. So when the signal is transmitted from the main instrument, if the remote terminator is set in the absorbing mode, as you can see here with the arrows that are moving, uh, the signal will be absorbed and will not come back to the main side, will not be reflected back. It will completely be absorbed by the terminator. So this is one mode in which it will absorb, and these modes are all uh, that's the trick, right? So all the modes are controlled by the main unit through controls provided on the cable under test, over the cable under test, right? So it can also be set in the reflection mode. So as you can see, if you set the terminator in the reflection mode, the signal goes out from the main, goes to the remote far end, which is the terminator, and then reflects back entirely, almost entirely, to the near end. So if you set the reflector mode for the terminator, all of the signal you send with the degradation that takes place in the cable under test will come back to the main unit. So this makes it possible to perform all various tests using qualification plus technology. The core of this technology is in fact in this intelligent and dynamic configuration of remote terminator to provide a wide range of test functionality. Okay. With that, maybe I can also give some idea about how various different tests are done. Like for example, the wire map, DC resistance, shield, length, delay, and delay skew. As I earlier mentioned, the terminator is put in a it contains a DC electrical signature. In fact, it can contain slightly varying signatures. We have terminator number 1 through 8. So you can have a terminator number 3 at the remote end, and the main unit is going to know that what is connected at the far end is terminator number 3. So it provides uh, unique signatures for every terminator ID, and every terminator, regardless of what ID it is, will enable the main unit to perform wire map test, shield continuity test, DC resistance test, and so on. Now, with the reflection mode that we just saw, if the terminator is reflecting signals, it also enables measurement of round trip delay. So essentially, round trip delay measurement enables also length measurement, right? So as you know, round trip delay and with the known value of NVP, or velocity of propagation, you can actually come to know about the length of the cable. So it enables those measurements as well. It also, this is interesting, right? And some people always ask me, like, how are you going to measure insertion loss, right, with a single end? Because insertion loss is a measurement where you send a signal at one end of the cable, the transmitter, and the receiver is at the far end of the cable. It receives, and 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 uh, and then after the measurements are done, the information is exchanged between main and remote unit, and you know how much signal was sent out and how much of it was received, and you know how much is the insertion loss. This is a typical way, traditional way of measuring insertion loss. Uh, the qualification plus, we don't have a remote unit which can actually measure the reflection. However, it is done using what we just described by setting the terminator in either in the reflection mode and in absorbing mode. So by comparing the signal in these two modes, NSA actually can measure the insertion loss of the channel, insertion loss of the cable under test, right? So, so like you see here, uh, in the regular certification test, both units send signal to the other side, and then they measure, and then they know how much is insertion loss. In the qualification plus, which is the below picture, the signal is sent out, reflects back, and the main unit knows how much loss happened across the round trip, okay, of the cable under test. Similarly, measurement of return loss is done. Actually, return loss is measured in not so different between the two configurations, because return loss is a measure of signal that reflects back when you send a signal from the tester unit. So the only difference is that while the certification tester measures return loss at both ends of the cable, the NSA or qualification plus measures return loss at one end of the cable. If you want to measure at both ends, you of course then can exchange the tester unit, the NSA main unit, and the terminator from the two ends of the cable, and then you can perform second test to get complete idea about return loss from both ends. And same way for crosstalk. Crosstalk is a near end measurement. Uh, crosstalk, uh, specifically near end crosstalk, is the the measurement of signal transmitted on one pair of the cable under test, and uh, and and leaking into the second, basically unwanted signal that is coupling to other pairs of the same cable at the near end, right? So here you can see with the arrows that the signal is transmitted from one end and it is coupled into other pairs, which is actually undesired, right? We want the signal to go straight on that pair and not go to other pairs. However, some of it does couple into other pairs and then returns back. So we are basically crosstalk, near end crosstalk is the signal that is coming back to the near end after getting coupled into other pairs. And this is also measured in a similar way between NSA, Qualification Plus, and the Certifier, as you can see here, right? Again, you can do two tests to get full picture of the crosstalk here. But in most cases, uh, uh, getting measurement from one side, as we discussed, right? The objective is not to perform warranty certification. The objective is to check uh, the performance of the cable, suitability of the cable for higher speeds and so on. In most cases, it is adequate to measure from one end and skip the other end, because uh, the effect, if there is a heavy crosstalk at the other end, it will show up in one or the measurements, either near end or far end, which is ACRF measurement, as we will see next. Okay. ACRF is attenuation to crosstalk ratio far end, of course, and it is different from near end crosstalk. It is the measure of signal that is sent out on one pair and coupled into another pair, similar to near end crosstalk. The difference here is that while near end crosstalk is the measure of the coupled unwanted signal coming back to the near end, the ACRF is the measure of signal that is actually continuing in the same direction and reaching the far end. And this is always measured in relative to the actual received signal on the desired pair. This is because if you have a very long cable, the signal you receive is going to be small, then even a small amount of crosstalk is a problem. Whereas if you have a short channel, you receive a very strong signal, and small amount of crosstalk is less of a problem. So that's why we call it attenuation to crosstalk ratio, and that provides a more realistic measure of the influence of crosstalk on the performance of the cabling. So it's always measured as a ratio. Here also, as you can see, what happens is that the signal actually uh, is it again uses a reflection mode of the terminator for NSA to get a complete picture of ACRF. Right? So you can do measurements with termination to get a first reference, and then reflection mode measurement to measure how much is actually caused, how much crosstalk is actually caused at the far end, at the received at the far end. Right? So this is how ACRF is also measured in NSA. So I think that covers all different measurements that I wanted to show. Uh, Steve, maybe I will just make some concluding comments, which is that single-ended testing is very suitable in all situations where you don't need testing from both ends. And the only situation where you really need the tester from both ends is when you do certification test. Okay, so it is a new paradigm. That's why it is called Qualification Plus. It is not a qualifier only, which only does network tests and qualification on different network speeds and DC measurements. It does all parameters that are useful for cable performance regarding high-speed communication links. Right? And it is a very cost-effective way, and it's a powerful troubleshooting tool. It provides absolutely same level of troubleshooting as a certifier would. and it is also useful in documenting a cable plant. Okay. So NSA, of course, is the first qualification plus tester in the industry. So Steve, with that, I will pass over to you.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And that your last point there, I was going to bring that up, Harshang. I don't know of any other equipment in the industry from a qualification standpoint that also includes the typical RF parameters that you would see in a certification tester. And again, to kind of recap that point, it's the NSA, the Network Service Assistant, using Certilite for Qualification Plus would not be used for certification, and it would not be used in support of manufacturer warranties because they do indeed require certification. And typically, your new installations, you're going to want to do certification in most cases, and some would say in every case. But certainly, if your work defines it as such, and you're supporting a manufacturer warranty. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out is, one of the reasons that we came out with this Certilite Qualification Plus testing capability in the Network Service Assistant is that often network managers and IT techs have to decide between a certifier and a network troubleshooting tool, because they need to do network troubleshooting, but sometimes they need to confirm that the cabling is conforming to the limits set by the standards, which they can do that with the NSA, the Network Service Assistant, using that Certilite test. So it gives them an affordable solution instead of having to choose between two different testers. One of the questions here came up. Somebody was asking if you could expand a little bit on the spool test that you mentioned, using NSA for the spool test. So can you share a little bit about that with us?
Sure, Steve. So spool test is typically done in one of the two ways. The first way, because the spool has a very long length of cable, about 300 meter typical, what that means is even if the far end is left open, you still get a reasonable measure of return loss and next, because the reflection from the far end will be extremely small to cause much of a problem. Okay, so it is very typical that a cable spool is measured from single end, and sometimes you cannot even access the far end. The way the spool is made, it's very difficult to even access the far end, so you have no choice but to leave it open. NSA in this case is a perfect tool, because you can put a terminator, right? If you have access to the far end, you can connect our terminator to the far end and then connect the NSA main unit at the near end and perform a test. Our NSA or Test Pro both support testing of long lengths of cable. And in this case, it is 300 meters, but we do have a single pair Ethernet test possibility with the same testers, and we have already tested it for channels longer than 1 kilometer. So, so these tools are perfect for testing long lengths of cables and getting information. So I think it is the perfect tool for spool test.
Great. Thanks. Appreciate that. We had another question. I think we've already answered this. I think the person is asking, it could be used to test and certify or only for field testing. So the clarification is, for certification, if you have to certify the cables, you would want the Test Pro multifunction certification tester. If you're qualifying in the field, what we call Qualification Plus, you'll see those same testing parameters. As Harshang mentioned, you'll see near-end crosstalk, ACRF, return loss resistance. Those parameters are all included in the single-ended test, but it's not considered certification. So that's kind of the differentiator. Go ahead, Harshang.
Sorry, Steve. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that is why we call it Certilite, because it is almost certification but not certification.
Right.
It is not to be used when performing testing for warranty purpose. However, it does actually perform accurately all parameters.
Right. So it bridges that gap between a qualifier and a certifier. We do a lot more than your normal qualifiers would. There was kind of a related question to that. Somebody wanted to know which parameter shows a bad cable. That could be any of those parameters that we talked about. wire map right out of the gate is going to show you if you have a wire map problem, you're not going to even want to run a test. You'll see it immediately when you connect, because we do include a live wire map, so that we also can see right away that there's a wire map issue. So, and again, this is inherent in both our certification test, or the Test Pro multifunction cable certifier, and in the network service assistant. So you get that immediate notification. You'll see that wire map as soon as you connect, and you'll know if you've got a good wire map or not. So you don't really need to proceed with any testing if you have a situation where your wire map is bad. But if the wire map's good and you test, any of the other parameters could fail. Resistance is a big one. A lot of qualifiers don't even give you resistance. And this is a real important thing to point out with Network Service Assistant. Just like our Test Pro, it will give you these resistance measurements. Resistance is huge when it comes to power over Ethernet. So not just that loop resistance, but the DC resistance on balance information. So you need to be able to have that in there as well. Got another question here. Somebody commented it's a great tool for any user or technician wants to find out if its installed base is up to the task for new applications. And I think you touched on that, Harshang, when you mentioned that for moves, adds, and changes, or maybe you're deploying a new network topology, or not a topology, but a new network technology, you want to find out if your existing cable is going to be able to support it. So you can run the test. So maybe when it was installed, it was only tested to a certain level, but you can now test it again. Make sure there haven't been any environmental changes that have impacted it. If other things have been installed since that cabling was originally installed, they could have caused damages to the cable that maybe initially you didn't notice, that you could find upon subsequent testing. And let's see.
There is one question which says how to test if the cable performance is good.
Right.
And NSA gives a pass and fail clear result. So if you are testing a Cat6a cable, you can set the limits to Cat6a, and it will tell pass if the performance matches the Cat6a requirement, and it will say fail if it does not. Right.
And somebody was asking, not sure what this question means. How do we know the CR current in mechanics? Not sure about that. Then there was one, what will be the approximate dB loss for NSA? It's not really a component going in line, so you're not going to have a dB loss for the system. Not sure what they're asking for. That might be the assumption that it's an inline product in line with the network cabling, but that's not the case. This is how we know mechanical current in the cable is current resistance and the overall diameter of the cable. You see that question, Harshang?
Yeah. How we know mechanical current in the cable, in the current resistance and overall diameter. Actually, I'm not sure if I fully understand, but what this tester measures is the resistance of the cable, and if you also the length of the cable. So if you can find out how much is the resistance per unit length, if that was of interest for the cable. It does not directly tell the diameter, of course.
Right. And then there was a question about single pair Ethernet testing. Which range of the IEEE standards would we be testing to? And I know right now we don't have the SPE adapter for NSA, but we do SPE testing currently in our Test Pro product.
Yes, and for the Test Pro product, the SPE testing is done as per the cabling standards that are evolving right now. And so the IEEE standards define how the data transfers and what would be for the data transfer, and the cabling standard will define the performance of the cables. So those are the standards we are following, right? The 568.5 specs that are being developed now.
And that ties in with what is it? Was it 1000 base T1? Is that the
1000 base T1? 1000 base T1L to be specific. So 1000 base T1L is specified up to 1 kilometer and even longer, right? So we with the Test Pro, the testing has been done up to 1.5 kilometer long cable with 1000 base T1L performance uh, uh, measurement.
Right. Gotcha. All right. I think we're a little over time now. There's a couple other quick questions in here. Is
There
it
is a-
same like the Fluke tester? Well, it really depends on what you're comparing it to. If you're comparing certification, you want to look at Test Pro. If you're looking at a qualifier, then you would look at our Qualification Plus.
Yeah, and this is the first tool, Steve. Sorry to interrupt. Right, this is, as we mentioned, the only tool in the category in the market today, the Qualification Plus Certified. So there is
Exactly. There's nobody else that has
competition.
one like this. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep. Exactly. All right. And let's see. In many cases, we test cable. It shows all parameters matching with standards. At the same time, we know it's cheap quality. So I guess what we're getting at here is being able to look at all these different test parameters, these RF test parameters. You can get an idea if either the materials that you've installed, the cable has a quality issue, which would show up in crosstalk, for instance, all along the cable, or very poor resistance unbalance readings, those kind of things. Or if you have an installation problem, it might be showing up as a crosstalk at either end. Insertion loss can also be an issue with cable, maybe manufacturing and or installation if the cable was damaged. So there's a lot of these parameters, and having all of these in a Qualification Plus tester like the Network Service Assistant allows you to see some of these things without having a certifier. And there are instances, as you mentioned, Harshang, where certifier is the way to go. There's going to be other instances where Qualification Plus or Certilite testing is going to be the way to go.
Yeah.
So,
and it's about knowing whether it is a cheap quality or not. I mean, if the cable will pass, let's say Cat 6 standard, right?
Right.
Intended standard is Cat 6, but not all Cat 6 cables are the same, right? So, and that's where the parameters like resistance and resistance unbalance are important, right? So
Yes.
some of the cables with aluminum used inside, it is always good to do resistance unbalance measurement. So the good thing about NSA is that it is the only qualification category tester which actually provides the resistance and unbalance measurement.
Yep. And NSA with Qualification Plus, you're running a Certilite auto test will allow you to test Cat 5e, Cat 6, Cat 6a. The Test Pro, the multifunction certification tester, will actually go all the way up through Cat 8 and beyond when the standards change, because it is a 3 gigahertz platform. So when the standards change and you're doing certification beyond Category 8, at some point, the standards are going to do that. Those of us that have been in the industry as long as you and I have, Harshang, know that what we have today is not going to be what we're going to have in 10 years. We'll have more categories that we haven't heard of, more technologies we haven't heard of. So it's good to be ready for that. And I think with a product offering like our Qualification Plus tester and the Network Service Assistant and our certification tester and Test Pro, we've got what people need depending on their situation, whether they are in a qualification situation or they're in a certification situation. So I think we've run almost 10 minutes over time. So I think we'll, if we have any other questions that get asked, or just one more, I'll address real quick what parameters need to be tested after installing fiber cable, and then we'll close out. So that question right there, tier 1 testing is going to be your loss, your delay, your length. You've got to have all that, and you've got to have it, at dual wavelengths for multimode, dual wavelengths for single mode. So that's your tier 1 test. So you'll need that. And then if you've got to do tier 2 testing, that involves an OTDR. But beyond that, it's those are your optical loss tests there. So. All right, great. Well, we appreciate everybody's time. And again, we're about 10 minutes past our time here. So Harshang, I really appreciate you joining us in the middle of the night for you. Though it's midday for us, I know it's late in the wee hours for you, and we really appreciate your time. And folks, Harshang and I are going to do a full webinar on our Bright Talk channel that will expand in a little more detail than what we've gone over here on this topic. So if you're interested in that, it's going to be on the 27th of January, and you can head on over to our Bright Talk channel and take a look at that. So appreciate your time, and we will see you again on Tech Talk with Steve in 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.